Well, I just got my cue. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. Good to see those of you here in the sanctuary. And I can see you out there in Zoom land too. Oh, wait, I always forget. You know, it's backwards here, and it's like, yeah, where am I? Where's my hand going to go? Anyway, it's nice to be here this morning. I got up this morning and I thought, oh, goody, a snow day. Thinking about the days when it meant we could just stay home and not do anything. Of course, we've been staying home and not doing anything for a long time now, but anyway, snow days give us another excuse to stay home and enjoy ourselves in just being quiet and just enjoying the amazing unfolding of the weather and what it's doing. And of course, the other amazing unfolding things that have been happening lately, this last couple days, which have brought some peace, I think, to all of us. Yes, indeed. Those of you who were listening to special music may have recognized that that was a recording of Lavinia Paisano. She was singing a chant that she wrote herself, "Let me walk in the light of spirit." I just wanted to play that this morning because my talk today is inspired completely by Lavinia. Those of you who knew her, and particularly knew her in the last part of her life, know that she underwent a major transformation and became just this beautiful, shining light in the last part of her life. And I had the great pleasure of having her living with me at that time. And one of the things that she said that she attributed a great deal of her transformation to, and she did use the word transformation, she attributed it to, I gotta figure out how to do this book, Radical Compassion by Tara Brach. And so when I heard that we were doing the Nurture book and looked through the various different options, one of them was self-reflection. And this book, Radical Compassion, is a great guide to self-reflection. So I thought, well, those go together, so I'll just volunteer to talk about that today and bring to you a message about nurturing from a person who became extremely good at nurturing and for whom this book was transformative, and that is Lavinia. So let me see here. There's a story in this book, one that will probably sound familiar to some of you, but let me retell it anyway. So in about the 1950, mid-50s, somewhere in that time span, there was a highway that was being built in Bangkok, Thailand. And a Buddhist monastery was right in the path of the highway, so they had to move the monastery in order to build the highway. And inside the monastery was a large clay statue of the Buddha. And so they needed to move this clay statue, so they very carefully loaded it on to a conveyance, and they took it out of the building that was going to get torn down. And as it often does in Bangkok, it was going to be raining later that day. So they put a big tarp over the Buddha. And the chief monk of that particular monastery came out in the middle of the night just to make sure everything was all right. And he had his flashlight, and he was checking to see if everything was okay with, that the rain wasn't washing away, damaging the statue at all. And he looked under the tarp, and he saw a glint of light reflected from his flashlight. And he thought, well, this is interesting. And he looked closer and kind of looked a little bit, clipped away at a little bit of the clay, and lo and behold, underneath the clay was solid gold. They figured out later that a couple hundred years earlier, that area had been invaded, and that the monks at that time had decided to protect their golden Buddha from being confiscated and melted down by whoever the invaders were. They covered it over with clay to protect it. But in actuality, it was a solid gold, beautiful Buddha. So of course, the monks in the current 1950s all came and got their chisels out and very carefully took all the mud and clay off, and here was indeed this beautiful statue of the Buddha. Well, Tara uses that as an analogy, and I think we've heard that story before, some of us here, to talk about who it is that we really are. We really are all, at our cores, these golden, beautiful Buddhas of peace and light and love and understanding. But that during our lifetimes, starting when we're very, very, very small, the world comes at us in ways, and we figure we need to protect ourselves. And so what we do is we put clay, we protect ourselves by putting these coverings over who we really are. And now at this point in our lives, and many, many, many of us don't even remember that that's what we did. We don't even know where that clay came from. And so we go around with our inner Buddhas hidden from ourselves as well as from each other. So self-reflection is a way that we can begin to, or if we've already started, we can accelerate the rate at which we can uncover for the world to see and for our own selves to be able to enjoy the beauty and the wonder that we all are inside ourselves, where our goldenness lies within. You know, November is the power of release. So I thought that was a particularly wonderful way of tying this all together, because what we can do with self-reflection is to release that clay that we've put over ourselves that we don't need anymore. So what can we gain from self-reflection? It can help us to be aware of when we are in touch with that inner part of ourselves, our highest self, when we are living from our highest self. Or those times when perhaps we're not in touch with our highest self and we're living from something else, and I'll talk about that in a minute. It can also help us to understand and let go of the parts that we need to let go of, that we no longer need to protect ourselves, so that we can be more of a shining light. And it can help us to see that every single other person on the whole planet, every one of them, also has that divine golden Buddha within. And that we can focus on that part of them and not on the clay. So those are the things that self-reflection can do. Now other things do that as well, but those are three things that we can get from self-reflection. So the question is, what is it how do we get a handle on, how can we think about coming from our golden selves versus not living from our golden selves? And Tara Brach uses a device that she got from Joseph Campbell. And that device is, now let me see if I can get this right. Nope, wrong hand. I'm doing this for the Zoom people. I'm trying to point to where this little thing is on the Zoom screen. It's this drawing behind me of the circle with the line through it. And the circle represents all of our consciousness. And the line represents the distinction between when we're living on top of the line, which is when we are aware of and conscious of who we are and what we're doing, and when we're living from below the line, which Tara refers to as living in trance, living in a trance of some sort. And the trance is what prevents us from being wholly and completely present in wherever we happen to be, whatever we happen to be doing. So what is it that we call this being in trance? Well, she has some interesting ways to describe the difference between being in trance and being not in trance. And let me just show you here, read you what those are. So when we are present, when we're totally open and available to the moment that's happening at this moment, we are above the line, we're lucid, our emotions are coming through us, but we're witnessing them mindfully, we're in contact with our feelings, our hearts are open and tender, we're responsive to whatever's happening around us, and we have a balance and an openness about the way that we are in the world. When we're in trance, however, we're unconscious, we're below the line, we're somewhat asleep, caught or possessed by some emotions, disassociated from our feelings. Our hearts are kind of closed and they're feeling defended or numb, and we're reacting to experiences rather than responding to them. And we're mostly grasping or resisting whatever is happening around us. So of course the idea is to move from below the line, above the line. And how do we know? How can we recognize when it is that we're living below the line? Well, here's some examples of what some people have said in terms of flags that made them suddenly aware of the fact that they had slipped below. I realized I've just gone through a whole bag of trail mix. I'm now feeling that everybody is the bad guys today. My kids, my boss, my partner. I'm finding fault with the world. These are, again, our expressions of living below the line. I catch myself sizing up other men to see who's the most dominant. Even the small stuff feels like just too much. I'm listening to someone and planning how to get outside for a cigarette. I lose an hour following the links online. Yeah. My neck starts hurting and I realize my shoulders are up and knotted and that I've been anxious for hours. I notice my inner voice, usually my mother's, saying, "Can't you do anything right?" I'm walking through a store and I suddenly realize that I'm comparing my body with every other woman I see. I'm rushing around trying to get things done. And then I hurt myself or I break something. So those are examples of when it is that we let ourselves get into trance. And we're not really living from who we really are. We're living from this pattern of unconscious beliefs and other conditionings and things that we have that prevent us from being able to be our full human selves, our full human compassionate selves. She also uses a cute little, now this is going to be tricky for me, wait a minute, there we go, okay, it's great, stay there, don't move. I'll do it with both hands so that you guys can use what, you can watch this one over here and the Zoom people can watch this one. She also uses a device to help us remember what this looks like and how our brains work, and that is, if you think of your wrist as being your brain stem, and you think of your thumb as being your limbic brain, which is the one we developed long time ago. It's the one that reacts and keeps us safe and has our basic survival is what our thumb's going to be. And then our fingers are our cerebral cortex, and they curve over, like they really do in our real brain, they curve over when you hold your thumb like that. And they have the capacity now, in the last 70,000 years or so, our cerebral cortex has the capacity to interfere and override what our limbic system was telling us, so that we don't just run around reacting to everything and becoming survivalists all the time. This part of our cerebral cortex helps us to interpret what's going on and bring more to it than that and make different decisions. An example of how this works would be when you're driving, let's say you have someone else in the car, so you're driving with a little extra caution because you're concerned about them, and someone cuts you off. So what happens is your limbic brain immediately kicks in, and before you even know what's happening, your foot's on the brake, and you've slowed the car down, which is good. But at the same time, you've had a flood of adrenaline go through your system, and your limbic system is saying, anger, anger, fear, fear. Well, what normally happens is that our cerebral cortex comes in and says, oh yeah, that was a little tense there for a minute, but look, see, we've slowed down, we didn't hit him, everything's all right. When our cerebral cortex, however, is overstressed and is not able to override that, when it gets tense and it gets stiff and it gets kind of set in its ways or somewhat rigid, then we lose contact with that. And instead of reacting that way, we react by, I can imagine all kinds of things we might do, but the word that comes to my mind is road rage. Road rage comes when our cortex is no longer able to stay flexible and in touch with our limbic system because it's all stiffened up by stress and whatever else has gone on in our lives and conditioning. So that's just a little model to keep in mind of how this works. What can we do? What can we do to be able to intercept ourselves when we feel that our limbic system, our cerebral cortex, what keeps us out of those just plain survival reactions, when that needs to be overridden, how can we make sure we keep being able to do that? Well, Tara Brach recommends a 4-step process called RAIN. And it is very similar in some ways to things that we've already talked about here. It has some similarities to what Roger mentioned last week, as a matter of fact. But I think the most important things about it is that it encourages us to actually go into and feel what it is that we have at that moment, as opposed to trying to gloss it over and push it away. But let me tell you what the 4 steps of RAIN are. The first step is to recognize. Recognize that, oh wait a minute, I think I'm overreacting here. I think I'm coming from trance in some fashion or other. I need to just stop for a minute and recognize, this is probably not what I want to be doing right now. The second letter, A, is for allow. And this is to allow ourselves to just actually feel whatever emotion it is without judgment. That's the key thing. Without judgment and without resistance, to just let the emotion be in us and say, okay, that's what I'm feeling. Identify it and allow it to be. And it's important that we not judge it, because emotions are there to help give us information about what's going on. And when we start judging them and resisting them, we lose whatever they have to offer us, and we push them out of the way, but they don't really go away. We need to let them be. The third step is the I of RAIN, and it stands for investigate. Investigate means to be able to say to ourselves, okay, so what part of my body right now am I feeling this in? It may be a tension in your stomach. It may be that your shoulders are tight. Whatever it may be, your heart may feel constricted. Wherever in you feel something like that, to just stop and say, okay, this is the emotion I'm feeling. Here's where it is in my body. And ask that part of your body, ask it, what is it you're trying to tell me? What is it that you most need right now? And that's the investigate parts. And then the N part is nurture. And nurture is what we do when we've located what that is and are able to give that part of ourselves a little bit of loving care. And that's the N for nurture. And if we can do those 4 steps, we can begin to not only allow ourselves to interrupt any of our living below the line and begin to help ourselves get back up again, but with this investigate step, we can also begin to allow ourselves to heal those places within more actively, so that we don't have to keep doing this over and over again. We can stay above the line more of the time. I have not got a clock, and I don't know what time it is, but I want to read to you just briefly a description of what this looks like in a real case. So let me just do that real quick here. So this is a story of a woman named Janice. Janice is like some of us, perhaps. Like I know I had similar things like this happen in my life at one point. Janice is both a caregiver to her elderly parent as well as raising a child who's a teenager. And so she's caught and is working full-time and supporting the family at the same time. So she's a single parent. She's got a lot going on. So this is a story about Janice. One afternoon, after she'd parked her car at her father's nursing home, she decided to do RAIN before going inside to visit. She reclined her seat, closed her eyes, and asked herself, what's happening inside me? A familiar voice in her head said, this is the last thing I want to be doing right now. I just don't have the time. Her jaw was clenched, and when she thought of her father, she felt dutiful, resentful, guilty, and tight. Then Janice decided to make a U-turn, turning her attention inward. And this was the starting place of RAIN. She recognized that cluster of feelings, and instead of judging herself for them, she simply allowed herself to feel how painful they were without pushing them away. Then, after a few breaths, she leaned in, beginning to investigate with interest, trying to get a better sense of what was going on. She gently asked herself, what is the worst part about this? And her attention went right to her chest. She felt heat, tightness, and pressure. Ah, she said to herself, I'm angry. And as she let the anger be there, it began to change shape. It morphed into a sense of powerlessness. There was no way she could live up to what was expected of her, with her father, with her son, at work. She was falling short. She would always fail. And now, along with that feeling of helplessness, came some self-condemnation. I just don't like who I am. I don't like this grim, angry, close-hearted, helpless self. Investigating had connected her with what she had been running away from, the deep belief that she was failing and that she was an unloving person. She then recalled the question that we had explored together. Is it possible that these beliefs feel real but are not true? Asking this gave her enough space to stay present with what was unfolding. She then asked, when I am believing this, what is my experience inside? Her heart felt raw, tightly bound, and filled with a very childlike sense of helplessness and shame. She also felt an oppressive wave of fatigue. As she contacted this deep emotional pain in her body, she realized that these feelings had been buried within her for as long as she could remember. A natural response of sorrow and self-compassion arose. Janice had reached the N of RAIN, the nurture, and with tears and with tenderness, she began to whisper to herself, just as she would to a young child, this is really difficult, and you are doing your best. You love your dad. You love your son. Now that you're here, you can relax. It's enough just to be with Dad now and love him now. It's okay. She did relax, as if letting go into the arms of a wise, kind parent. She sat still for another 5 minutes or so, letting in and resting in the warmth and openness of this new space inside of her before she went inside. And when she peeked into her father's room, he was just waking up from a nap. He beamed at her and said, I just had a dream about you. They laughed and shared some memories, had a very nice visit. And she realized after she left that her father hadn't asked her when she was coming back. She was back, and he wasn't so lonely. So that's an example of what RAIN looks like in the real world and what it can do. And it's very, very helpful to have that ability to be able to interrupt ourselves so that our relationships with the people around us that we know and care about can be better and that we can live from above the line more and more often. But there's another side to all of this that I want to talk about particularly today, and that is a concept of an unreal other. Now, in the story I just read, before Janice went in, before she sat in her car and did all of this, her father had become an unreal other to her. He was just another thing she had to do. She was looking at it as if it was a burden. And so she had actually taken away his ability to be a complete human being in her mind. And she was offering to him only just this narrow little piece of her, not the fullness of who she was, because she had pushed him off into this other world of being an unreal other to her. Well, it's very easy. It isn't very easy, but it's easier to see when we've done that with people we really love, because we're with them all the time, and we can say to ourselves, oh, wait, you know, I remember now that I really wasn't paying attention at all to what you were telling me about this, and I need to stop and be present for you. But the other part about all of this, and again, going back to that limbic brain situation that we talked about earlier, is that we are trained from our limbic self to embrace people who are in our tribe, but to push away people who are not in our tribe, and make the people who are not in our tribe unreal others. That all happened before we developed our cerebral cortex, before we had the capacity to interrupt that behavior. But it's one that is very, very strong in our limbic system, and one that is constantly causing us to do things like have racism. Well, let me just read you the list of things that it causes. It causes institutionalized racism, classism, oppression of refugees, the mindless destruction of our ecosystem, political divisions in our country. What it does is it allows us to be so conditioned that when we see someone who isn't in our tribe, we stiffen up, And we can't get back down to counter that limbic system, and our reactions are just to say, oh, those people, whoever they may be, those people, they're not fully human. Because that's what we had to do way back when we were in small tribes. We had to protect our tribe against all the other tribes. And so we made the other tribe not human so that we could go ahead and do what we needed to do to protect ourselves. Well, we still have that within us, and it kicks in when we have these conditioned responses to other people. I'm bringing this up in particular today because of what's happened in the last couple of days on our elections, with our election and with the political scene. I know that it's been a very difficult time for a lot of us. I know that for those who on all sides of this question, when we have this many people, 70 million people on one side and 74 million people on the other side, we need to be able to get past this tribalism of seeing each other as other. We need to be able to see each other as the full complex humans that we are. That's what I think was the president-elect's message in his speech last night. But whoever had won, it is what we need to be doing, is trying to get past this notion of seeing each other as other and being able to see the full completeness of who we are. Well, RAIN is one way that we can help do that. And it's a little different when you're talking about this tribalness, because instead, what RAIN would suggest we do is to say to ourselves, wait a minute, is this person real to me in this moment? Whether it's a person who's actually in front of you, or whether you're just considering some abstract notion of, well, what's going on here with this particular person that I'm not with at the moment, but I'm seeing somewhere on the news or somewhere else. Is this person real to me? What does this person care about? What is happening in this moment inside of them? And then be mindful of whatever empathetic reaction we might have to whatever we're seeing is happening in them. The allow part is to allow again and not judge, to become genuinely curious. And if you can find yourself able to allow their experience, to then say to yourself, well, how am I reacting to what I am hearing about what their experience, their real experience is? The investigate part can take on the tone of, where does it hurt? If you can ask them, what is it like being you? And then genuinely listen. That can give us a way to be able to get past the clay and be able to see really what is happening with these people who we otherwise would reject as being other. And finally, the nurture part is to extend our compassion and an authentic expression of care for everyone who is hurting. So that's an example of how these self-reflection can help us not only in living above the line more often with people right around us, but also as we consider the larger world all around us as well. So I'd like to just take a moment now to do a meditation. One of the things about nurture in the 4 steps of RAIN is that it asks us to be able to give ourselves a goodly dose of light and love and compassion when we find what it is within us that needs that attention. And so there's a meditation here that would help us to be able to tune into and locate that part of us that has that capacity to give ourselves love and compassion. So I invite you all to just sit back now and settle in for relaxing where you're sitting, allowing yourself to just rest where you're sitting. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable for you. Allow yourself to just let go of any physical tension. Go to that place of stillness within. Allow yourself to go to that place of stillness to allow that peace to fill you. And just for a moment, imagine that you are face to face with your highest self, with your divine consciousness within. Imagine the look in the eyes of your highest self looking at you. Imagine the expression on your highest self's face as it gazes at you. Imagine it giving you a gesture of love, perhaps a touch on the cheek, perhaps putting arms around you, embracing you. Holding you in light and love. You can feel that peace, that reassurance, that deep sense of being loved. That deep sense of reassurance. That you are perfectly fine just as you are. You are loved. You are embraced by this inner higher presence within you, filling you with a loving presence. Relax into this wonderful embrace until you sense that you and it are one. And you can feel the love and the wisdom living within you right now. You know that you take that presence with you wherever you go. That presence within is always there. Always ready to give you the nurturing that you need. And so we now come back to this place, this room, knowing that we can return anytime to this place of love and nurturing and warmth and wisdom that is our highest self. Come back to this room. Come back to where we are, here, now, in this snowy, Sunday day. You know, there's a quotation in the book about the story I told you about with the Buddhist statue covered with clay. And the rest of the story includes what the monks do when they tell the story. When they share the story of the clay-covered Buddha, they say that in the face of threats or challenges, each of us has a habitual way of covering the gold. Our suffering comes when we identify with our protective coverings and forget the loving awareness that is intrinsic beneath it in the gold of our being. And Rumi said, "Your path is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built up against it." So that's my comments on self-reflection. Again, if you're interested in what this is, it's a book called Radical Compassion by Tara Brach. As we're discovering, for those of us who are reading Brain Bliss, our brains are continually growing and changing, and we can remake them by filling them with positive thoughts, by changing the neuron paths that are there that have been laid down over many years. We can change those, and this form of self-reflection is one way to go about doing that. So thank you all for listening today. Thank you to Lavinia for having brought her presence into our lives and for having brought the presence of this book into my life and maybe to some of yours. Self-reflecting is a powerful tool, and I invite you all to think about and do what we can to add this to the spiritual tools that we use here at Unity.